This is Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The people who live up here have their own name. They call themselves Yoopers. And they call everyone below the 5-mile bridge Trolls. Their peninsula is connected by land to Wisconsin, but answers to Michigan, cut off from the rest of their own state by 5 miles of open water. Most Americans don't even know they exist. This was once the world's largest copper-producing region. The towns built up here had opera houses and racetracks in the middle of frontier territory. When the copper ran out, those towns emptied so fast that families left furniture inside their homes, walking out as if they'd come back. They never did. But the people who stayed didn't fade with them. They built. At the top of Lake Superior, they run the busiest lock system in North America, pushing freight through ice in winters when every other shipping route on the continent shuts down. On an island in the middle of that same lake, scientists have been tracking the same population of wolves and moose since 1958. The longest predator-prey study in history. The Yoopers live alongside all of it and rarely think to mention any of it to anyone outside the peninsula. This is Michigan's Upper Peninsula, the part of America that has its own name, its own dialect, and its own way of doing nearly everything. And the deeper you go, the less of it makes sense. Along the southern shore of Lake Superior, cliffs rise straight from the water, their faces streaked in brilliant orange, pink, green and blue, colours formed by minerals slowly seeping through the rock. These are the cliffs of Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, a stretch of sandstone bluffs along Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and one of the most dramatic shorelines in North America. Iron leaves rust-red streaks, copper stains the stone turquoise, and manganese bleeds jet black down the cliff face. The local Ojibwe people called this place Painted Stone and treated the cliffs as living spirits. Paddlers who passed beneath them traditionally left tobacco offerings for safe crossing. Early explorers called the red-stained sea caves the Caves of the Bloody Chiefs, convinced they were looking at evidence of mass executions. Just ahead, one formation has held its shape longer than most, carved by the same waves into something almost too perfect to be natural. That formation is Miner's Castle, shaped by centuries of crashing waves into one of the most recognised rock silhouettes on the entire lakeshore. It's made of sandstone, one of the softest rock types along the lake, meaning it's constantly vulnerable to erosion. In 2006, one of its 2 turret-like towers suddenly collapsed into the lake. No warning, no dramatic build-up, just gone overnight. What looked permanent for generations turned out to be on borrowed time. On perfectly calm days, the water below Miner's Castle becomes so still and clear that kayakers have reported feeling like they're floating on glass. While the rock crumbles season by season, something small and very fast is working the open shoreline above it. About the size of a blue jay, the merlin is a compact falcon built for speed, regularly taking down birds larger than itself, even hawks on occasion. It doesn't circle or hover. When it locks onto prey, it launches into a direct high-speed chase, weaving through open air with relentless precision. Along the exposed shoreline of pictured rocks, small birds have almost nowhere to hide, turning this stretch of coast into prime hunting ground. Merlins don't build their own nests. They simply take over abandoned ones left by crows or magpies and settle in without hesitation. During migration, they trace coastlines like highways, using the edge of land and water as a navigational guide, which is why so many pass through here each season. For the birds feeding along this shore, the merlin is often the sudden end of open sky. East along the shore, something appears that has no business being next to a freshwater lake. The Grand Sable dunes are towering sand walls at the water's edge, more Sahara than Michigan, perched on a bluff and shaped entirely by wind and lake-driven weather systems. Over time, the sand slowly overtakes everything in its path. Trees at the edge have been found half buried, their trunks still standing, while their roots disappear beneath shifting grains. Locals call this stretch the Singing Sands. On dry days, moving grains vibrate just enough to produce a low humming sound from beneath your feet. Not far from here, the ground drops away entirely, and what's waiting below has been falling for a very long time. Chapel Falls drops roughly 60 feet over layered sandstone shelves, each shelf a different age, stacked like pages of a book that the forest has been slowly reading. It takes its name from Chapel Rock nearby, a sandstone formation that early explorers apparently thought resembled a ruined chapel when seen from the water, and the name stuck. Then the trail leads back to the shoreline, where Lake Superior takes over, so wide it's hard to tell where the water ends and the sky begins. This is the largest freshwater lake on Earth by surface area, big enough to cover the entire landmass of South America in water if you spread it out. Beneath its surface lies a body of water so cold and dense that even brief exposure can shut down the human body in minutes. Lake Superior can't keep calm for long. It generates its own storms, producing waves powerful enough to overwhelm ships, and has claimed hundreds over the centuries. Sailors have long called it the graveyard of the Great Lakes, a name reflected in the wrecks resting across its floor. The locals called it Kitch-iti-kipi, the Great Sea, treating it with the respect given to an ocean, because in many ways it behaves like one. When winter arrives, the shoreline transforms. Waves freeze mid-crash, forming jagged ice walls that reshape the coast entirely. In the coldest months, shifting ice emits low, distant groans that carry across miles of frozen surface. Out on the open water in warmer months, a lone shape briefly breaks the surface, a common loon, before slipping back under, leaving only its haunting call behind. It has 4 distinct calls, each with a meaning. A wail asks, "Where are you?" A tremolo signals danger, a yodel marks territory, and a soft hoot is a family check-in. Every male has his own unique yodel, like a vocal fingerprint, and when he moves to a new territory, he actually changes it to match. Pairs return to the same lake each breeding season, but they're more loyal to the territory than to each other. If one disappears, the other quickly finds a new mate. In late summer they gather in groups, from a few to over 100, not to feed but to drift, watch each other, and quietly size one another up like a serious neighbourhood meeting. To dive, loons have solid bones instead of hollow ones like most birds, which lets them sink fast and reach depths that would crush a human diver without equipment. But that same adaptation comes with a cost. They are built almost entirely for water and struggle to move on land at all. Their legs sit so far back on their body that they can barely stand upright, making walking or running nearly impossible. On land, they are effectively trapped in a body designed for another world. The lake has been shaped by nature for a long time, but not far from here, people left their own mark on this shoreline too. Fort Wilkins, historic state park, was built to protect copper miners pushing into what was then the edge of the frontier, a remote outpost surrounded by forest and lake. The soldiers here never fired a shot. The real enemy was isolation, as long winters cut the fort off from the outside world for months at a time. It was abandoned soon after it was built, and sat empty for decades, now one of the best preserved mid-1800s outposts in the country. Original wooden buildings still stand, including the barracks, kitchen, and officers' quarters, now restored to reflect daily life inside an isolated frontier post. The copper the soldiers guarded fueled an industrial boom, and just down the shore, its ruins still stand, slowly reclaimed by the lake that outlasted it all. Gay Stamp Mill was once a thundering operation where massive steel hammers crushed rock non-stop to separate copper from stone, loud enough to be heard miles away. At its peak, this stretch of Lake Superior shoreline was one of the world's most productive copper processing zones, now just crumbling concrete and twisted metal. Explorers walking the site today find concrete foundations, rusted machinery, and a long underground tunnel running along the surface of the Stamp Sands. From the ruins, the water changes completely. There's a waterfall here that doesn't run clear, and the reason why is stranger than you'd expect. Tahquamenon Falls. State Park runs a bold amber brown, not from pollution or mud, but from tannins leaching out of cedar and spruce, the same compounds that colour tea. Locals and visitors have been calling it Root Beer Falls for generations, and standing at the edge of it, foaming and churning at the base. The nickname is impossible to argue with. In spring, snowmelt pushes so much water over the falls that the amber foam piles up several feet thick along the banks, drifting through the trees like something out of a dream. Winter transforms the falls completely. Ice builds along the edges while the centre continues to roar through, defying the season. The mist freezes instantly on contact with trees and rock, slowly coating everything in layers of ice. Each winter reshapes the scene in subtle ways, as shifting ice formations along the banks change week by week, and that makes no two visits ever look the same. The amber colour of the water actually appears darker and more intense against the white snow and ice, contrasting almost unreal in the middle of winter. In the leaf litter along every trail that approaches the falls, something small and striped is working, with a ferocity completely out of proportion to its size. The eastern chipmunk is one of the forest's most industrious animals, spending nearly every waking hour in autumn collecting and storing food before winter shuts everything down. Its cheek pouches stretch to 3 times the size of its own head, capable of holding dozens of seeds in a single load. Every load gets carried back to a burrow system, dug well below the frost line, with separate chambers for sleeping, storing food, and even disposing of waste. Underground, there's a fully organised apartment. A single one can stockpile enough food to last all winter, sealed in, warm, and completely self-sufficient as the forest above freezes solid. Unlike bears, they don't fully hibernate. They wake periodically through winter to eat from their stored supply, then drift back to sleep, repeating this cycle for months. Hawks, foxes, weasels, and even house cats hunt them relentlessly, forcing them to stay in the open only seconds before darting back to cover. A chipmunk's alarm call, a sharp, rapid chipping sound, works as a warning system for other animals too, and many forest species have learned to freeze when they hear it. For all the chaos at ground level, quieter residents survive, and just above the undergrowth, perched at the tree line, one vividly marked bird watches it all unfold. The eastern bluebird is one of the most recognisable birds, with a blue so sharp it looks almost unnatural against the muted browns and greens of the Tahquamenon forest. That colour isn't produced by pigment. It comes from the structure of the feather itself, bending light in a way that makes the blue appear to glow, especially in direct sunlight. Their soft, warbling call is often the first bird sound heard on a quiet morning in these open woodlands. Gentle enough to miss if you're not listening, but unmistakable once you know it. These birds are precision hunters, dropping from a low perch straight onto insects on the ground below. A short, silent dive that rarely misses. Beetles, crickets, grasshoppers and caterpillars make up the bulk of its diet in warmer months. But when winter cuts the insect supply, it switches almost entirely to wild berries and fruit to survive. They nest in tree cavities, but because they cannot excavate their own, they rely entirely on abandoned woodpecker holes or artificial nest boxes to raise their young. In winter, those that remain huddle together in tree cavities at night, packing in tightly to share body heat when temperatures drop hard. Between these trees, a community once lived, worked, and vanished, leaving only a single church still standing against the forest. Central Mine was one of the most productive copper mines in Michigan, pulling enough ore out of the ground to make it one of the wealthiest operations in the entire region. When the copper ran out, the town emptied so quickly that some families left furniture still inside their homes, walking away from everything they had built as if they expected to come back. Even now, one of Michigan's longest-running community traditions, the church's yearly reunion brings descendants of the original mining families back to the same pews their ancestors once sat in. Today, the silence here is total, which makes it all the more surprising that just down the road, the air is filled with the constant roar of falling water. Bond Falls doesn't drop in a single line. It spreads across a wide rock shelf, splitting into dozens of streams that crash together again at the bottom. After heavy rain, the falls can double in volume within hours, shifting from a gentle cascade to a far more powerful rush almost overnight. The mist produced at the base of the falls is sufficient to sustain its own microclimate, keeping the surrounding moss and ferns green and wet, even during dry summer stretches. Near fast-moving water, the belted kingfisher announces itself with a rattling call, like a spinning reel, then drops like a stone and resurfaces with a fish in its bill. It is an opportunistic hunter, feeding primarily on small fish, but also taking crayfish, frogs, and the occasional small lizard. Whatever the water offers, it adapts to. A kingfisher's favourite perch is always a bare, overhanging branch directly above the water, high enough to spot prey below, and positioned for instant dives with almost no delay. They are fiercely territorial about their perches and will chase away other kingfishers, and occasionally much larger birds, from any branch they consider theirs. But the trees ahead are different, wider, taller, and untouched, the kind of forest that has been left alone long enough to become something remarkable. The Porcupine Mountains hold one of the Midwest's largest old-growth forests, never logged, never cleared, never replanted, still much as it was before Europeans arrived. It wasn't named after the animal. The Ojibwe called it Calumet, place of the porcupine, because the jagged ridge looked like a porcupine's back against the sky. The most visited viewpoint inside the park sits high above a lake that used to be called Carp Lake, a perfectly accurate, completely forgettable name. It was renamed Lake of the Clouds, which describes what happens on still mornings when fog settles between two forested ridges of volcanic rock and pools in the valley below the overlook. The lake sits between two ridges, worn down from a long-ago fold in the Earth's crust, which is exactly why the fog gets trapped so perfectly between them. Fishing is allowed, but every fish caught must be released. No boat rentals, and if you want to get out on the water, you carry your own kayak on foot. Somewhere in the surrounding forest, an animal so rarely spotted that even experienced hikers go years without crossing its path. Wolverines have occasionally been reported moving through this region. Solitary predators, built for extreme cold, capable of thriving in conditions that suppress almost every other carnivore. It looks like a small bear, moves like a weasel, and behaves as if it were never told it was the smallest animal in the room. It has been documented driving grizzly bears off fresh kills. Pound for pound, it produces one of the strongest bites of any land mammal on the continent, capable of crushing through frozen bone to access the marrow inside. Its paws work like natural snowshoes. Wide, semi-retractable claws spread its weight across heavy snow, letting it travel terrain that stops almost every other predator cold. They don't hibernate, remaining active through harsh winter, tracking carcasses buried under snow with a sense of smell strong enough to penetrate solid ice. A single one can cover territory, spanning hundreds of square miles in a single season, patrolling and scent marking every inch of it against rivals. Wolverines are so aggressive that they have been known to raid the food caches of wolves and even drive them away from their own kills. They reproduce slowly, raising only a small number of young every few years, which is exactly why their populations are so fragile, and their sightings in places like this remain so rare. Michigan calls itself the Wolverine State, but what's crazy is that they were likely never common in the state at all, and some historians believe the nickname came from an insult, not a tribute, used by neighbouring settlers to describe the people, not the animal. For all its ferocity, they share this forest with an animal far more commonly seen, one that is bigger, heavier, and surprisingly more relaxed about the whole business of survival. That animal is the black bear, and in a forest this old and this undisturbed, it has made itself very much at home. Here, they follow the same river corridors season after season, wearing trails into the forest floor that have been used by generations of bears long before any hiking path was ever built nearby. They are strong, confident swimmers, perfectly comfortable crossing cold rivers and streams to reach new feeding grounds on the other side, treating the water as a road rather than a barrier. Despite their size, black bears aren't aggressive predators. They spend most of their lives eating berries, nuts, insects, and anything easy to find. They have a memory sharp enough to recall the exact location of a productive berry patch from one year to the next, returning to the same spots. Before winter, a black bear will eat almost continuously for several weeks, gaining enough weight to survive months of sleep without eating, drinking, or waking up once. During winter sleep, a mother bear gives birth. Cubs are born blind, hairless, and squirrel-sized, nursing while she stays nearly unconscious. By spring, the cubs emerge alert and curious, already twice their birth size, raised through winter, without their mother ever fully waking. Their hearing is about twice as sharp as a human's, and their sense of smell far stronger than a bloodhound's, so they're often closer than you think, before you ever notice them. From the forests of the Porcupine Mountains, the peninsula's industrial past reasserts itself in full. Calumet was once the richest copper-producing district on Earth, controlling a major share of the world's supply of one of its most sought-after metals. Copper wealth built a town that had no business being this far north. A full opera house, racetrack, and cornet band, all in what was still basically a frontier. At its peak, Calumet attracted world-class performers to its opera house, a level of culture rarely seen in such a remote mining region. When the copper boom finally ended, Calumet didn't burn down or get torn apart. It simply stopped growing, leaving behind a nearly intact boom town, frozen at the height of its prosperity. After everything Calumet was, Wagner Falls feels like the peninsula exhaling, water moving slowly over rock, completely unbothered. The forest surrounding it has never been logged, and the trees pressing in on all sides are old enough that the canopy barely lets any direct light reach the falls at all, even at midday. Wagner Falls drops in small, gentle tiers instead of one plunge, spreading over mossy sandstone shelves, like the forest is slowly leaking. The moss covering every surface here isn't decoration. It's a living system that holds moisture, cools the area around the falls, and supports plants that can't survive anywhere drier. Local hikers have long treated this spot as a reset, a place to stop, sit, and let the sound of gentle flow do what faster rivers never quite manage. Wagner Falls isn't the only thing the forest has kept. A short distance away, one of Michigan's earliest copper mining settlements sits nearby, its old structures still standing in the trees. The Delaware mine was one of the Keweenaw's first copper operations, where miners descended into raw shafts to extract native copper so pure it often had to be chipped apart by hand. Work was done almost entirely with hammers and chisels, a slow, exhausting process that left little margin for error beneath unstable rock. When the easy copper was gone, the settlement was abandoned, and the forest quickly reclaimed it, trees and undergrowth swallowing most traces within a generation. The same trees that swallowed this settlement are part of an expansive forest across the western Upper Peninsula, so large it has its own name and rules. Ottawa National Forest stretches across the region as an interconnected network of woods, waterways and wetlands, with hundreds of lakes fed by long-established river systems. Autumn arrives early here, with peak colour in mid-September, when the canopy turns to reds, oranges and golds reflected across rivers and still water. Known as Big Snow Country, this area is shaped by heavy lake-effect storms that bury it for nearly half the year, transforming travel and daily life. Somewhere inside this forest, the sound finds you before the water does, and it gets louder with every step until Agate Falls finally comes into view. It drops about 40 feet through a tight gorge in the Ontonagon River, where the water compresses, accelerates, and crashes into a churning roar below. An old railroad bridge still spans the gorge above, retired but left standing, letting visitors walk out over a roaring waterfall, on a structure never built for sightseeing. At the base of the falls, where the current slows and spreads out, a sleek river otter works the shallows, turning Agate Falls into its personal fishing ground. In Ottawa National Forest's cold, fast rivers, it tracks prey not only by sight, but through sensitive whiskers that read subtle movements in the water. Built long and low, its body is shaped for speed, slipping through freezing currents with almost no resistance. Its fur is so dense that its skin stays dry even after hours in water, 2 layers working together, with the inner coat trapping warm air against its body. An otter can seal its ears and nostrils underwater, hold its breath for minutes, and see clearly below the surface. Escaping is nearly impossible once it locks onto a target. Fish make up most of their diet, though they will also take crayfish, frogs, and the occasional small bird or water snake when opportunity allows. River otters don't just move for survival, they slide down muddy or snowy banks for play, repeating the same slopes over and over with no practical purpose. Family groups travel together along river corridors, with mothers guiding pups by pushing them into the water long before they are fully ready. Grooming takes up a large part of their routine as they carefully maintain their coat. Without it, insulation fails, and cold water becomes dangerous within minutes. They also mark territory along river edges using scent signals that researchers can follow to trace entire ranges with surprising accuracy. Not far from the water's edge, the trees thin out, and a common but often overlooked bird is already at work, pulling breakfast straight out of the ground. The American robin is Michigan's state bird, and most people stopped actually looking at it sometime around childhood. They also sing before dawn, often while the forest is still completely dark. First bird up, every morning, without fail. Many of the robins seen across Ottawa National Forest each spring never actually leave. Instead of migrating, they survive winter tucked into dense thickets, staying quiet and out of sight. Some of those berries only become edible after being frozen solid and thawed out repeatedly, the robin essentially waiting for winter to do the cooking. When spring arrives, males who toughed out the cold have a serious advantage. They're already in the best territories before the others even show up. Finding a worm has nothing to do with hearing. One tilts its head and uses its eyes to detect the faintest movement in the soil, spotting prey before it ever breaks the surface. Their eyesight is sharp enough to see ultraviolet light, revealing colours invisible to humans, including markings on berries and insects that make food selection more precise. They have a small throat pouch called a crop that lets them store food before digesting it, so they can gather more than they can eat at once and finish later. The forest ahead leads somewhere the robin never follows, a place where water doesn't fall or flow, but rises straight out of the ground, cold and perfectly clear. Kitch-iti-kipi is Michigan's largest freshwater spring, a wide pool fed by limestone fissures that push water upward with enough force to keep the surface in constant motion. The temperature never changes. Winter or summer, it stays constant so the spring never freezes, even when the surrounding forest is buried in snow. Visitors cross on a hand-pulled raft, looking straight through the water to the bottom. Fallen logs, swaying plants, and sand bubbling up where the springs emerge. The Ojibwe called it the Big Cold Water and saw it as sacred, a place where the line between this world and something older felt thin, not to be entered without purpose. Early settlers reported feeling watched near the spring, and local stories described a spirit in the water that would pull down anyone who disturbed the surface. Seen from above or from the observation raft, the water reads as something between glass and sky, a vertical space that feels more like air than liquid. The water is so transparent it becomes disorienting. What looks shallow reveals full-grown trout far below, their size difficult to judge through the distortion of depth. That clarity comes from years of limestone filtration, removing nearly every particle so the spring reaches the surface purer than most treated drinking water. In the forest canopy above and throughout every woodland in the Upper Peninsula, one bird is always singing, before you arrive and after you leave. The red-eyed vireo holds the record for most songs in a day, one male once sang over 22,000 times from sunrise to sunset without stopping. Each male carries a large collection of distinct phrases, cycling through them while foraging, while chasing rivals, and apparently just while going about its day for no particular reason. Those famous red eyes aren't there from birth. Juveniles have plain brown irises that shift to ruby red only after surviving their first winter, as if the colour has to be earned. Its nest is a small woven cup hanging from a forked branch, so well camouflaged with bark and spider silk, holding white, dark spotted eggs that both parents take turns incubating. The song fades as the forest thins, and ahead the outline of old buildings appears through the tree line, the quiet traces of a village that copper built, and silence eventually reclaimed. Ahmeek was a company town in every sense. The mining operation owned the houses, the stores, and the roads, and when the copper stopped paying, it stopped caring about all of it. At its peak, the village never went quiet. Shift changes, supply wagons, and machinery ran around the clock, because the rock underground didn't care what time it was. When the company pulled out, the village didn't collapse overnight. It simply emptied, house by house, family by family, until the streets went still. Some of the original stone buildings still stand along the main road, built to last, because the company once believed the copper would too. The forest pressing in around Ahmeek doesn't stop here. It's part of something much larger, stretching all the way from the shore of Lake Superior to the edge of Lake Michigan. Hiawatha National Forest is one of the biggest patches of public forest in the entire eastern half of the country, and most people drive past it without a second thought. Hidden inside are hundreds of inland lakes, tucked between the trees with almost no warning before you're suddenly standing at the edge of one. Locals have travelled and lived through these woods for generations, and the land still carries names, trails, and gathering places tied to that history, most of which never make it onto tourist maps. When a severe storm knocked down thousands of trees, the fallen wood quickly became home to more species than the standing forest had before, destruction quietly turning into new life. As daylight drains from the sky and the forest goes dark, the animals that ruled the daytime step aside, and a different kind of hunter takes over the night. The great horned owl moves through Hiawatha in near total silence, its feathers designed to muffle flight so completely that prey has no warning before contact. It hunts skunks, porcupines, and animals several times its own weight. One was found with dozens of quills embedded in its body and had apparently just carried on with its life. Its talons lock shut with a mechanical tendon system. No muscle effort needed, so once it grabs something, letting go becomes the real challenge. When food is plentiful, it freezes the leftovers and thaws them later using its own body heat, which is kind of smart. At this scale, few animals are able to challenge it directly, yet its role in the forest is less about dominance and more about constant movement through the food chain. It routinely kills barred owls, red-tailed hawks, and takes young bald eagles from unguarded nests. Great horned owls pair for life. The same two birds return to the same territory year after year, and if one dies, the survivor often spends the rest of its life alone. Courtship begins in the dead of winter when the male performs a series of low, rhythmic hoots in the dark to win a female's attention, essentially serenading her through a snowstorm. Here, it starts nesting in the coldest part of winter, sitting on eggs through blizzards in nests it didn't build, quietly taking over old hawk or raven nests from the season before. Owlets hatch completely helpless, blind, covered in white fuzz, and fully dependent on their mother for warmth, while the father hunts alone every night to keep the entire family fed. And even here, survival is rarely simple. Competition can come from unexpected places, including others defending the same territory. On the forest floor below the owl's territory, the ruffed grouse makes a spring drumming sound that carries through the trees, low, fast, and seeming to come from everywhere at once. On the forest floor below the owl's territory, the ruffed grouse makes a drumming sound that carries through the trees, low, fast, and seeming to come from everywhere at once. Most people think it's hitting a log, but it isn't touching anything. The wings move so fast they create a vacuum in the air, and the collapsing pressure makes the sound. It's like a thunder, made from nothing but air. Outside that display, the bird is almost completely mute, just a few squeaks and hisses, which makes the drumming even more dramatic by comparison. In winter, comb-like projections grow along its toes, doubling foot surface like natural snowshoes across Hiawatha's crusted snow, then fall off each spring on schedule. When temperatures drop hard enough to kill less prepared animals, the grouse dives headfirst into the snow and sleeps inside a tunnel where the air stays far warmer than anything outside. The drumming that defines this bird's entire existence is also its biggest risk. Most grouse only get one season of it before a predator locks onto the sound and finds them. A brief, spectacular performance. And then, like everything in this forest, the story moves on until the trees thin out and the land opens up to something far quieter. Bete Grise sits at the very tip of the Tahquamenon Peninsula, where Lake Superior stops being a backdrop and becomes the entire view, cold, wide and indifferent. The name is French for grey beast, which makes perfect sense the moment a November storm rolls in and the sky, water and sand blur into a single shifting horizon. A handful of old clapboard buildings still line the bay. A church, a school, a general store. All that remains of what was once a Copper-era settlement. That silence follows the road inland, where not far from here, another settlement once ran on copper and ambition, and now stands mostly as walls and memories. Phoenix was a real working town. Stores, saloons, a post office, families, built on the copper boom, and when the mines dried up, the people left and took most of it with them. What sets it apart from most ghost towns is that some buildings never fell. They just sat unused, standing through decades of Upper Peninsula winters that should have brought them down. On grey days, when the light flattens and the wind picks up, the remaining structures look less abandoned and more simply waiting, as if the next shift is just running a little late. And at the edge of it all, one building outlasts everything. Not a mine office or storehouse, but a church, still standing as if it never got the memo the town was gone. The Phoenix Church is one of the oldest wooden buildings in the peninsula, built by Copper-era immigrants who hauled materials in by hand before the town even had proper roads. When the settlement emptied, the church didn't shut down immediately. Services carried on for years, kept alive by a small group determined not to let it fall silent. Even now, it occasionally opens its doors for gatherings, making it one of the few places where the same walls that once held copper miners are still used in the same way today. Southeast of the mining country and the ghost towns, the land flattens into something that was once sold as a promise and delivered as a catastrophe. In the late 1800s, developers drained and logged the area, convinced it would make perfect farmland. It didn't, leaving settlers with waterlogged, useless ground and no way out. The land was abandoned, and nature, given enough time and no interference, quietly rebuilt it into one of the largest freshwater wetland refuges in the eastern United States. The refuge sits directly under a major migratory flight path, and twice a year, the sky above it fills with birds moving between continents. Some stop here, and some never land at all. Riding the air above the water, wings barely moving, one bird knows a wetland this size means one thing above all else: an easy meal. Here, bald eagles perch high in white pines above the pools, often choosing exposed branches that give a full view of the water below. In winter, they may spend up to 98% of the day perched, barely moving, conserving energy, because hunting only pays off when the timing is perfect. The bald eagle's eyesight is so sharp, it can spot a fish beneath the surface of the water from hundreds of feet in the air, and once it locks on, the dive is committed. It doesn't always do the catching itself. They regularly chase ospreys and other birds mid-air until they drop their catch, then swoop in and take it. Above the open pools and marshes, this behaviour plays out regularly, making the refuge one of the best places in Michigan to watch an eagle essentially mug another bird in broad daylight. Bald eagles mate for life, and the nests they build together grow bigger every year, the same pair returning each season to add more material until it grows extraordinarily large. But for all its size and power in the air, the eagle shares these same calm waters with a bird that makes it look almost modest, slower, quieter, and somehow even larger: the trumpeter swan. By the mid-1900s, they had been hunted nearly to extinction, and Seney became one of the key places where the species was quietly given space to recover. It's the heaviest native bird in North America, built like a small aircraft rather than a waterfowl, yet it still takes off, flies and lands with surprising smoothness. In flight, its slow wing beats can be heard before it's seen, and its call carries across Seney's pools like a low brass note, less a song than a physical presence moving through the air. Pairs mate for life, travelling and feeding together year-round, a level of commitment that makes most other animals look deeply casual about their relationships. During migration, they travel in tight family groups, and young cygnets learn the route entirely from their parents, with no instinct to guide them if they're separated. When large numbers gather at open water in winter, they take turns feeding and keeping watch, so the group as a whole is almost never fully off guard at the same time. A gathering of trumpeter swans is one of nature's loudest scenes, every bird calling at once, the sound carrying for miles across open water, like a brass section with no conductor. From the wetlands of Seney, Lake Superior pulls us back to its surface, and to the most isolated piece of land in the American National Park system. Isle Royale sits in the middle of the lake, reachable only by seaplane or hours-long boat ride, so everything living here either swam, flew, or crossed the ice. Each winter the park shuts down completely, not for maintenance but because Lake Superior physically cuts it off from the mainland. Surrounding waters are so cold and open, they act as a natural buffer, moderating seasonal shifts so conditions remain more stable than on the nearby shore. Everything on this island operates on its own scale. And nothing makes that clearer than turning a corner on the trail and finding a moose the size of a horse standing in front of you. A full-grown bull moose is the largest deer species, towering above a person on horseback and built for moving through terrain that would slow most other animals to a stop. That massive rack is grown from scratch every year, shed in winter, regrown by fall, one of the fastest biological growth processes in the mammal world. On Isle Royale, moose wade into lakes and marshes, dunk their heads underwater, and pull up plants from the bottom, a feeding method that looks ridiculous and works perfectly. The first moose arrived here by swimming across open water on their own, found no predators waiting, and simply never left. With no predators, the population surged and vegetation took the pressure. Saplings vanished and forests were stripped bare, pushing the system toward collapse. In winter, they dig through snow for buried plants and strip bark straight off trees just to survive, a slow grind of feeding that keeps them alive through months of scarcity. Calves can outrun a human within days of birth, which matters more than it sounds, because the island that once had no predators eventually got some. The Isle Royale moose population is one of the longest studied wild populations on Earth, revealing what happens to ecosystems when a top predator disappears and when it returns. Somewhere in the tree line right now, moving without a sound, the grey wolves are already watching. They arrived on Isle Royale the same way the moose did, across the frozen lake in winter, and from the moment they appeared, the entire island began to shift. A grey wolf can detect prey from nearly 2 miles away, track scent trails hours old, and relay direction to its pack through subtle cues humans would never notice. The pack operates as a single unit, probing, pressuring, and adjusting in real time, because a failed chase wastes energy they cannot afford. Across the island, pack size is always in flux as wolves die, disperse, or form new groups, and the island's stability can depend on whether one pack is thriving or collapsing. Leadership rests with the breeding pair, guided more by experience than dominance, and when seasoned members are lost, hunting success can decline for years. Pups are born helpless and raised collectively, fed, guarded, and even babysat by the entire group, revealing a level of coordination far beyond instinct alone. Even in adulthood, they keep playing, chasing, wrestling, and testing each other in ways researchers believe sharpen real hunting skills. A wolf can endure long periods without food, then consume up to 20 pounds in a single feeding, an extreme cycle shaped by unpredictable hunts. No two wolves share the same howl. Scientists studying Isle Royale's packs can identify individuals purely by voice, without visual confirmation. Howls are not just location signals, but also markers of identity and unity. Group calls after hunts or reunions carry across miles like collective celebrations. Isle Royale keeps its secrets well, and so does the town across the water, where the furnaces went cold long ago and the buildings never came down. Fayette was built to smelt iron ore, drawing on nearby hardwood forests as fuel and operating non-stop on Lake Michigan until the timber supply finally collapsed. At its height, it was a complete company town. Hotel, opera house, doctor's office, and rows of housing, all organised around the heat of just 2 furnaces. When operation became too costly, the company shut everything down and simply walked away, leaving structures, machinery, and interiors exactly as they were. What makes it unusual is not just that it closed, but how it was left. Most industrial sites were dismantled or stripped, but this one was abandoned in place, preserving a single frozen moment in time. Archaeologists later found coins, bottles, and children's toys still inside the buildings, everyday objects that outlasted the lives they once belonged to. After the furnaces fell silent, the forest slowly returned, reclaiming the edges of the settlement until nature and rust began to merge into one another. And somewhere among those trees, a small bird keeps tapping away, as if the silence of a vanished industry was never enough to make it stop. The downy woodpecker is North America's smallest woodpecker, barely hand-sized, yet it strikes bark with a force that would be devastating if scaled up to larger animals. To withstand that impact, Its skull is reinforced with dense sponge-like bone that disperses shock with every udder, acting as a natural buffer built into its frame. Even more unusual, its tongue wraps around the skull like a coiled spring, stabilising each strike while reaching far into wood to extract hidden insects. In the recovering forest around Fayette, it works the standing dead trees left behind, timber softened by decay, where insect colonies thrive beneath the bark. Males and females reduce competition by dividing vertical space in the forest, foraging at different heights and across different trees within the same territory. Each night in winter, it excavates a fresh roost hole instead of reusing the same one, rotating shelter sites to reduce the risk of predators learning its pattern. Its drumming is not random noise but a coded signal, each bird producing a distinct rhythm used to mark territory and attract mates without relying on song. Despite its size, it is unusually assertive, often feeding alongside much larger birds and competing aggressively for cavities when opportunities appear. Not far from here, Lake Huron waits, and scattered across its surface, a quiet chain of small islands sits as if the water simply forgot to connect them. Les Cheneaux means the channels in French, named for the narrow waterways threading between the islands, forming a protected inland passage rather than open lake. That sheltered geography shaped everything here. In the late 1800s, calm waters drew wealthy families escaping heat and noise, who built summer estates along the shore. Many of those early cottages still stand today, some preserved, others still quietly lived in, combining old craftsmanship with modern use. Les Cheneaux hosts the world's largest antique wooden boat show every summer in Hessel, drawing restored vessels from across the country, some built before fiberglass existed. The largest island sits just beyond the nearest passage, forested, low-lying, and held by the same sheltered waters that make this chain feel cut off from the wider world. Marquette Island is the largest private island in Lake Huron, and almost all of it remains undeveloped, not from lack of demand, but by choice. That deliberate stillness is why the forest feels older than most, unlogged, uncleared, and left to its own rhythm in a region where nearly every other tree was cut at least once. At dusk, as light fades and water stills, the shoreline becomes a feeding ground, birds arriving from the channels, drawn to the calm waters that sustain this place. And among the most visible of those birds perched at the water's edge, with wings held open to dry, the double-crested cormorant is already waiting for its next dive. That spread-wing pose looks ceremonial, but it's purely practical, because the cormorant has a problem almost no other water bird does. Its feathers are not waterproof by design, allowing water to penetrate and reduce buoyancy, turning it into an exceptionally efficient underwater hunter at the cost of flight readiness. After each dive, it must fully dry its wings before taking off again, an unusual constraint for a bird that lives on the water. Underwater, though, it transforms, cutting through the channels around Marquette Island with speed and agility that its awkward posture on land never reveals. Cormorants nest in large, noisy colonies, where competition is intense, and early arrivals claim the best nesting sites before others return. Their colonies can reshape the environment itself. Guano is so acidic, it kills the trees beneath them. Once the canopy dies, the birds abandon the site, leaving pale, skeletal trunks behind. Despite these impacts, they remain one of North America's most successful waterbirds, even if their presence often puts them at odds with local fishermen. At the eastern end of the Upper Peninsula, the land narrows to the Straits of Mackinac, linking Lakes Michigan and Huron, spanned by one of America's great engineering feats. The bridge stretches nearly 5 miles across open water, and the currents beneath it run hard enough to have sunk ships for centuries before a single cable was ever strung. Setting the foundations meant workers diving into lake water cold and dark enough that visibility was nearly zero, making it one of the most closely watched engineering challenges of its time. The roadway is designed to sway several feet in high winds because a flexible structure survives forces that would crack a rigid one. Drivers who are genuinely afraid of the crossing can request that bridge authority staff drive their vehicle across for them, and a surprising number of people take that offer every year. Every Labour Day, the bridge closes to vehicles for a single morning and opens to walkers, drawing thousands who come just to stand in the middle of open water on 5 miles of steel. Crossing it leaves one Michigan behind. The road then bends west to Copper Country, where the Tahquamenon Peninsula juts farther into Lake Superior than any other point in the state. Underneath it sits one of the largest deposits of pure native copper ever found. Not ore that needs processing, but raw metallic copper sitting loose in the rock, ready to pull out. The peninsula gets some of the country's heaviest snow. Superior's lake effect buries towns to second-story doors, while the same lake creates a microclimate where unique plants thrive. At the very tip, where the land finally runs out of room and the lake takes over on 3 sides, a small harbour sits at the edge of everything, the last stop before open water in every direction. The lighthouse here was one of the first 2 ever built on Lake Superior, constructed to guide the copper ships that were about to reshape the industrial economy of an entire country. In the height of winter, Copper Harbour hibernates. Businesses close, roads empty, and only a handful of residents remain with whatever the lake brings in. The full drive along the ridge above town is widely considered one of the most spectacular in the Great Lakes region. When October nights settle in and the harbour goes still, The darkness here runs all the way to the horizon, and on the right night, the northern lights fill every inch of it. The aurora forms when solar particles hit Earth's upper atmosphere, but the Quinault's northern magnetic position makes those collisions far more visible here. A storm barely noticed farther south can still light Copper Harbour's sky in green and violet curtains, not because it's stronger, but because of where you're standing. At Brockway Mountain, Lake Superior opens an unobstructed northern horizon. No trees, no structures, just open space between land and sky. On moonless nights, the Milky Way appears dense and structured, rather than faint, and long exposure photography reveals colours and detail the human eye cannot perceive. What makes this region so consistent is not just season, but the lack of light pollution. Darkness remains the defining condition, year-round. The best auroral displays tend to arrive in spring and fall, when longer nights align with higher solar activity, moments locals often describe as visually disorienting in scale. Local lore even points to the vortex behind a mineral shop in town, a place said to hold strange energy, kept alive by nights when the sky feels unusually alive. The lights fade, the lake stays, and just down the shore, Eagle Harbour has been sitting quietly through all of it, waiting, as it always has. Eagle Harbour is one of the Quinault's few natural harbours, a rare break in the rocky coast where ships could shelter, and the reason a village exists here at all. The harbour became a key stop during the copper rush, as ore and supply ships moved non-stop, and the village that grew up here served the boats first and the people second. Lake Superior has claimed ships along this coast often, making Eagle Harbour's sheltered bay vital. Storms build fast, temperatures drop hard, and danger arrives with little warning. At the harbour's edge, the lighthouse has done the same job for generations, watching the water, marking the rocks, and guiding ships safely back out. Eagle Harbour Lighthouse is one of the area's oldest active light stations, built because this rocky coast was wrecking ships the copper industry couldn't afford to lose. Year-round life here demanded resilience. Keepers endured winters that buried the station in snow and cut it off for days, yet the lights still had to run without interruption. Its original lens concentrated a weak flame into a beam visible for miles, an optical feat that stood as a major engineering achievement of its time. Along the same shoreline, birds still work the waters as they always have, fishing these channels long before the lighthouse, indifferent to its beam, ships, and everything in between. The herring gull is one of the Great Lakes' most adaptable birds, fishing, stealing meals mid-air, or striding through parking lots like it owns them. It can drink salt water, a rare trait in birds, thanks to a gland above the eye that removes salt, making it hard to starve no matter where it is. Here, gulls drop clams and mussels from height onto rocks to crack them open. a learned behaviour that young birds pick up by watching adults, not by instinct. Farther down, where sand shifts and wind rarely stops, another lighthouse stands alone. No village, no harbour, just stone, water, and whatever the lake sends in. Crisp Point is one of the most remote lighthouses in the area. The nearest town sits roughly 30 miles out, and for most of its working life there was no road to reach it at all. The lake here doesn't get rough. It gets personal, with storm waves topping 25 feet and hitting a shoreline with nothing behind it to absorb the impact. By the 1980s, those waves had eaten so far into the surrounding land that the lighthouse was actively falling into the water, and the government had already decided to let it go. A group of volunteers disagreed. They raised their own money, moved the tower back from the water's edge by hand, and saved it with zero outside funding. It still stands today, watched over by that same small preservation group, reached only by an unpaved road cutting through miles of forest. From one of the loneliest spots on the lake, the road eventually delivers you to Munising, a town built entirely around getting people onto the water. Munising sits in a natural bend that shields it from Lake Superior's full force, the only reason a town this small has held out against a lake this powerful for so long. It began as an iron and timber settlement, driving heavy extraction from the surrounding forests before industry eventually faded away. After the collapse of its resource economy, the town shifted direction and reinvented itself around the very region it once exploited. That reinvention stuck, and today the town functions as a launch point. Every dock, business and trail funnels movement toward the cliffs and caves just offshore. Not everything here needs a boat or a dock. Some of it just needs a short walk into the trees, where a waterfall has been doing its thing in total silence. Munising Falls drops roughly 50 feet into a sandstone gorge, and there's a path behind the falling water that lets you stand between the curtain and the rock face, completely dry. Those walls didn't just happen. Water spent a very long time cutting through layered rock, leaving behind bands of different colours that make the gorge look like it was painted in sections. In winter, the falls partly freeze into a thick ice curtain, with water still rushing underneath, and even in summer the gorge stays sharply cold. Follow the shoreline far enough west, and it leads to Sul Shua Point, a lighthouse so far from everything that the name itself is French for only choice. That name wasn't poetic, it was practical, given by sailors who had no alternative when storms rolled in along this exposed stretch of Lake Michigan. Here, ships had nowhere else to turn. The keeper's role extended beyond tending a light, as this station often became the only refuge for damaged vessels limping through heavy weather. Over time, that reality shaped its reputation, with reports of strange occurrences emerging later from maintenance crews who worked alone in long, isolated seasons. Meanwhile, Whitefish Point sits further up this same shore, and it's famous for two things: birds passing through in enormous numbers, and the ships that didn't. This stretch of Lake Superior has claimed more vessels than almost anywhere on the Great Lakes. Its waters hide ships lost to storms so sudden and violent, crews had no time to react. Above it all, it sits on the North America's busiest migration routes, where hundreds of bird species funnel through each spring and fall, treating it like a lifelong highway exit. Among those migrants, one stands out for arriving not in spring, but in the dead of winter, pale, silent, and built for cold, in a way that makes the harshest days here feel perfectly ordinary. The snowy owl is one of North America's heaviest owls, a body plan shaped less for speed than for retaining heat across open, wind-exposed terrain like Whitefish Point. Those thick white feathers double as insulation and camouflage, erasing the bird against snowfields so completely that it often vanishes even when in plain sight. Unlike most owls, they hunt in full daylight, a necessity where darkness can last months or vanish entirely. Their hearing is precise enough to locate small animals moving beneath a foot of packed snow, hitting the exact spot without ever seeing it, navigation by sound alone. They fly in near silence, not as behaviour but as structure, their feathers engineered to muffle airflow, removing any warning for prey below. When food becomes scarce in the far north, they move south in irregular eruptions, sometimes appearing across the Great Lakes in waves that birders track, like shifting weather systems. Females are larger than males, and plumage changes with age, older females becoming nearly all white. They often form long-term pair bonds, with males continuing to bring food to females even outside the breeding season, an ongoing exchange that sustains the pair across harsh cycles. From these open flats, the shoreline curves to a rocky park, jutting into the lake, where water shifts colour and the tree line meets the waves head-on. Presque Isle Park sits at the city's northern edge, a rocky peninsula jutting into open water, and on the right day, waves crash hard enough to send spray above the tree line. The ground here is some of the region's oldest exposed bedrock, dark, dense, worn smooth in places, split sharp in others, like it's been through something. After dark, the outer point goes completely black. No city light reaches it. And on clear nights, the sky above the water fills in a way that tends to stop people mid-step. At the far edge of that same point, a lighthouse has been standing over the rocks and the waves long enough that it has become as much a part of the view as the water itself. It was built to protect iron ore ships in and out of Marquette, one of the nation's busiest iron ports, where a single mistake could send a loaded vessel straight into the rocks. The iron trade it served was so significant that keeping this light running wasn't optional. It was the difference between cargo arriving and cargo disappearing. A keeper once reported waves hitting the tower itself in a violent storm, not the base or shore, and though now automated, the building remains a working lighthouse and small museum. Where the trail bends into the trees and the waves fade, the park's quieter residents move through unbothered, pause, glance up, then go back to grazing. White-tailed deer are named for one thing, the bright white underside of their tail, which flips up at the first sign of danger, signalling others to move. That flash isn't just a warning, it's a full instruction, and deer within sight respond to it faster than any sound could travel. Fawns are born with white spots that break up their outline in dappled light, and for their first weeks they survive by lying still and giving off almost no scent. A deer's nose can pick up a scent from nearly half a mile out, which is why they're often gone before you spot them, reacting to something you didn't even know was in the air. Along the forest trails, they've learned to graze around foot traffic, appearing at dawn and dusk when the paths clear and the park shifts back in their favour. Bucks grow and shed a full set of antlers every year, bone built at one of the fastest growth rates in the animal kingdom, then dropped clean as if it never existed. That same animal, looking perfectly calm beside a trail, can clear an 8-foot fence from a standing start, which tends to catch people off guard the first time they see it. Some places along this shore are still full of life. Others stopped being that a long time ago, and Mandan is one of them. It was a mining settlement that filled fast. Workers, families, noise, ambition, and then emptied just as fast when the ore ran out and the company simply moved on. What's left sits in the forest almost fully reclaimed, foundations swallowed by roots, clearings that were once streets, and the occasional rusted machine the trees haven't finished with yet. The Upper Peninsula is full of places like this, towns that flared, ran out of purpose, and slipped back to the trees, leaving the shoreline as it was before anyone arrived. This is the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, a land of hidden wonders and remarkable architectural marvels. Now, if you don't want to miss the most unreal wonders of the Netherlands, check out this video.